All right, let's start in the Fiesta Bowl matchup there. Michigan is the Big Ten champion coming in there to this game. TCU, everyone's saying Ohio State backing into the playoff. TCU technically backing into the playoff. They did lose their Big 12 title game there. They're in out of the Big 12 there. Over-under is set at 58.5. Michigan is 7.5-point favorite in the desert out there in the Fiesta Bowl. This is by Vrbo is the sponsor for this game. It comes down to me, Fresh, as I'm thinking about this game, is does Max Duggan have another gritty performance? Does he have what it takes, the ability to will a win by the Horned Frogs over the Wolverines? Or is Michigan going to take that loss last year? And there was a story that J.J. McCarthy, Blake Corum, a lot of those guys last year sat around and watched the confetti fall over Georgia. Not like crying, not anything else. They watched that and used that for motivation. This Michigan team's been all business all year. Talk to me a little bit. What are you seeing about the TCU Michigan matchup?
Well, I think first off, TCU is actually they're Cinderella. Like they fully embody that because last year this team was not on the rise. Like our team would be on the precipice of competing for a title. They got their coach fired. And these guys come back. Duggan was not the starter. He earns a starting role, goes through a medical procedure the day before kickoff, and then just energizes this football team. And they just take off. Like we thought the TCU upset of Oklahoma was like, man, this is a shocker, but there's no way this could last. Like that's just one game. They caught them on a good week, and they just kept going and going and going and going and going. And that's kind of like the Cinderella story where I think we just briefly talked about the Cincinnati, where it's different because Cincinnati was in the New Year's Six the year before, and they competed with Georgia. Like this is a whole out of nowhere TCU program that took a bad year, built off it, new coach, new regime, and they've all got a fresh start, and they played fantastic. Duggan has done a lot of it on his own, but Miller and Johnston, his receiver and his running back, have been the big playmakers to help him. And the offensive line's done just enough to give them holes and give them protection. But you need both sides of the football. The defense, they've allowed maybe sometimes early leads to build up against them, and they've gotten down, but they've been able to make adjustments at halftime and find ways to get turnovers and spur comebacks and hold on and get wins. Like this has been it's kind of like an NCAA basketball tournament feel where the team just gets hot at the right time and they get stops and they find ways to get that 3-pointer right at the buzzer or just the clutch wins. And it gets the energy, it gets the feel around it. And then you look at Michigan. They're that blue blood program just doing their business, taking care of it, going out there, very business-like, winning by 15, winning by 20, not really chattering much in the media, just doing their own thing. Now, their coach is a weirdo, but that's a whole different story for a different day. When you look at it, both these teams have had their monsters to climb over and get people to accept them as true contenders. Michigan, everyone thought that last year that Georgia loss was like, all right, this is the end. That's the 1 year. Harbaugh, they're done. They got exposed. They're not physical enough. They're not athletic enough. They can't throw. Whatever. We're done. Moving on. And then we have the same. We even said ourselves, oh, they played Colorado State. They played UConn. They played Hawaii. They played blah, 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 blah. They went out there and they boat raced Penn State. And honestly, I started believing like, all right, this team is legit. They're good. And then maybe they kind of maybe read their own press clippings a little bit versus Illinois. Because Illinois came in there after a loss to Purdue in the big house and gave them all they could handle. And they probably were looking ahead to Ohio State. But they got a little complacent in that football game. They survived. They understood their own adversity. And they went down to Columbus and they took care of business. Now, Ohio State had chances in that ball game. That's where Michigan, they won it in the fourth quarter. They didn't play perfect the first 3 quarters, but they won it in the fourth quarter. This team wins football games in the fourth quarter. They beat Purdue in the fourth quarter of the Big Ten title game. They beat Illinois in the fourth quarter. They are a fourth quarter team when it matters, and that just shows a toughness and a resiliency. TCU wins football games in the fourth quarter or overtime. They've had a couple overtime matchups. Now, obviously, the Big 12 title game is a different story. We both think that Miller got in, much less Duggan getting in earlier. This team, they are built to play through the full 60 minutes plus. They are not going to blow you out in the first 10 minutes unless you're Oklahoma, but they aren't going to be out of the football game. They are tough mentally and tough physically, and that's what's got them here. These 4 teams that made this far are not weak and not just gotten here by courtesy of everyone else being terrible. They are resilient football teams, and you're going to see 2 tough football teams competing here. TCU got left out of the 2014 playoff. Now, this players that are in this game, they were in elementary school, so it really didn't affect them. But the fan base understands that. The athletic department understands that. This is a big deal. You're here. You've got to show up in your moment. Michigan, you want payback. Payback versus Georgia if you get the opportunity to play them, or you get your other rival, that team from below you, in the national championship game potentially. You have a chance to really get through this game and then have an even bigger opportunity forward. Do you overlook TCU maybe? Do you sort of like, we're the Big Ten champs, we're undefeated, we've been here before, we know what we're doing. Do we overlook TCU? Because a lot of teams have made that mistake and they've paid for it so far this season. It's going to be an interesting dynamic. When you're looking at the 2-3 seeds, so far since 2014, the beginning of the playoff, it's 4-4. So there's not one seed or the other has an advantage. It's almost an even matchup every single time. And it's pick 'em, whichever way you sort of go. So you have to beware and be prepared. This is not a gimme win for anyone. This is going to be a battle across the board. But what TCU needs to do to win this football game, I think that's the question most people have. You've got to score touchdowns, not field goals. If you get drives, you've got to capitalize. You cannot kick field goals. 9-0, 12-0 is not going to do it. You need 17, you need 21, you need 24, you need 28, you need 35. You need to find touchdowns on drives more often than not to be able to put the pressure on Michigan. Second and third manageable. You cannot be put in 2nd and 10, 2nd and 12, 2nd and 15, 3rd and long. That's what Michigan pass rush gets you, and that secondary locks you down. You've got to maintain down distance, maintain the ball moving forward if you have any chance of surviving this football game. And third, you've got to start fast because Michigan has a nasty running game, and they're going to pound you into that 4th quarter. You've got to start fast and build the lead. You've got to be the aggressive and make them play in your terms. If you succumb to them and their dominance and them owning the clock and not getting off the field and them scoring, and you get down to 10, get down to 17, get down 20 points, it's kind of like an alligator roll where eventually they're going to drown you. You've got to be able to strike fast, strike early, and play in your terms, and do not let Harbaugh and company, McCarthy and Corum, McCarthy and Edwards, Corum's not playing, but allow them to play in your terms and play at a faster pace and not the other way around. Defensively, you have got to tackle. Edwards had over 100 yards after contact in the Big Ten title game versus Purdue. You have got to tackle. The first guy on there has got to wrap up. You cannot give them second and third because in the first quarter, that's one thing. In the 4th quarter, that's going to be 10, 15, 20 yards, maybe even touchdowns from 30 plus. You've got to wrap up and tackle and do not give extra yardage. You've got to force turnovers and you've got to own the line of scrimmage. You've got to be a physical football team. If you do not own the line of scrimmage, that offensive line, who is now the 2 years in a row best offensive line in the country, they've won the award, they are going to maul you left and right. You've got to be more physical. You've got to man up and own the line of scrimmage and get into the backfield. Interior pressure is going to dictate. Michigan, do what you've done all year. Impose your will. Be smart. Do not get cute if you want to win this football game. You start pulling out trick plays, start putting all the nonsense out there. Before you know it, you might be in a ball game. Just do what you have to do. Maintain your business. If you do have bigger goals and you're saying you're watching confetti fall, then obviously this game is not as important to you as the other games in the future. You have to maintain your business here, be professional about it, and get to the next step. If you start overlooking TCU, you're in a trap and you're in trouble. That's how you're going to have to win this football game, just playing smart. You have the talent, you have the recruiting, but you've got to be able to understand the moment and not let it become too big and not let TCU hang around. If they do, and you're in the ball game in the 4th quarter, you might end up on the other side of the result, which is unfortunate for you and unfortunate for Harbaugh, and it puts you back to square one again. Take advantage of the moment, understand the responsibility, run the football, be smart, don't get cute, impose your will, and you'll be fine. In the end, I think this is going to be decided in the 3rd quarter. I don't think TCU has the horses on defense to maintain a full football game and cause turnovers and get off the field. I think Michigan will impose their will, and by the 3rd quarter, that will start bearing and weighing on them more and more and more, and they will pull away like they have in the past couple of games. Michigan will win. They'll move on to LA for the national championship game. TCU will give a fight in the first half, but Michigan and Harbaugh's company and Harbaugh's boys will take advantage in that 3rd quarter and push on.
So, Fresh, I started thinking quite a bit. If I was TCU's coaching staff, what would I be doing? How would I be prepping for this game? And there's two game tapes I'd be watching. The first one is, like you mentioned, that Illinois game tape. The thing Illinois did in that game was they limited Michigan to 1 touchdown and 4 field goals. Illinois had a lead in that game. There was I don't want to say questionable, but there was a pass interference called towards late in the game to set Michigan up for the game-winning field goal. It's a call that could have gone either way. I thought both sides had an argument for that one. I would be taking a look at that tape. I would say, what did Illinois do to limit the Michigan offense? Because Blake Corum only has 108 yards in that game. It is his lowest rushing output on the season in the Big Ten games. The other game I'd be taking a look at is the Iowa game. Now, Iowa didn't have the offense to keep up with Michigan, but Michigan only put up 27 points in that game. That means going into the fourth quarter, they only had 20 points in the game. Now, Michigan won with defense, and TCU has a much better offense than the Hawkeyes here. But those would be the two game tapes I would be looking at and studying what did those defenses do to limit Michigan. Michigan, to win this game, they're going to have to ride Edwards. They want to play out in what you talked about is you're going to want to play out in front. Michigan, get a lead. Force Max Duggan, force TCU to play catch up. And if you do that, you're going to allow a lot of good things to happen. Let Donovan Edwards kind of control the line of scrimmage, control the game here, get out to that lead and being able to milk the clock. You look at that Illinois game. Michigan possessed the ball for 35 minutes in that game. Michigan wins the time of possession. Now, this Michigan team isn't perfect. They're not. There are flaws available. And you go back to the Ohio State game. That Ohio State game with about 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter was a one-score game. Ohio State made some really poor errors and poor decisions in the fourth quarter of that game, allow that game to get out of hand. But if you go back and watch the first 3 quarters, which I've unfortunately forced myself to do now, that game was very back and forth. It was a very evenly played game in that matchup there. Michigan can't just get into that. If TCU wants to win this game, Max Duggan needs to put up 2 touchdowns early on. The Horned Frogs need to have 14 points in the first quarter or within a drive or two of the second quarter. I need to see TCU being able to move the ball up and down the field. And like you said, you need to punch it in, get touchdowns, not field goals here. If they're able to do this, then game on. We got a football game here, folks. And let's really go after it here. If TCU has got to sell for field goals in this game, and Michigan's able to own the time of possession. So let's say Michigan's got 18 minutes of the time of possession here in the first half here. I don't know, man. I think that this game could get out of hand quick, fast, in a hurry. But I think that I'm not going to doubt Max Duggan. Kid's a scrapper. He's a feisty kid. He's got 30 passing touchdowns on the year, throwing another 6 rushing touchdowns. Kendre Miller, 1,300-yard rusher, 17 touchdowns on the year. This is an intriguing team. This TCU is an intriguing offense. I think they do give teams some difficulty. They're scrappy. They're battle-tested. I feel like they're more battle-tested than Michigan. Michigan has a couple of good wins they have some good wins. They probably have maybe the best win on all of the resumes. Don't get me wrong on that. But everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop for TCU. All year long, we talked about when is going to be the game that TCU loses. Oh, well, it'll be this week. It'll be versus Baylor. It'll be versus Texas. Or it'll be versus... And finally, they lost an an instant classic in the Big 12 title game. It's going to be interesting here, Fresh. I think Michigan's got the horses to eventually beat TCU into submission, but it's going to have to be McCarthy doing his thing. Junior Colston's going to have to get out after Max Duggan. But the funniest thing about this is how many times do we see K-State get to Max Duggan, put him on the ground, and there he is picking himself right off the mat, basically collapsing on the sidelines. This kid's a fighter. This kid's a fighter, and that's the number one thing. Like, more than anything, folks, especially in these games, you got to respect the hell out of your opponents. You got to have that level of respect. If I'm Michigan, I'm looking at Max Duggan and going, that is a tough SOB over there. That is a tough son of a gun. And he's going to fight until he has absolutely no fight left. He's going to have a broken leg not to come out there on the field. And I love that about that kid. I love that about Duggan. McCarthy has been a huge upgrade than McNamara. And that Michigan offense has been cruising along. I got Michigan, and I'll say by more than the spread late in the fourth quarter. But TCU, there is a pathway to victory, but it's going to be a tough road to hoe.
I mean, you brought up two good points. Like the Illinois game was great, but the way they shut down the running game, TCU handled Bijan Robinson. So they know how to take care of a running game and sort of put that into a clog and put that Michigan offense potentially, if they do what they did at Texas, in a situation where the McCarthy's going to have to throw the ball to win. He's going to have to take it on his own shoulders. And then TCU, they've been in those battles because they've had to come back a lot. They haven't been out front leading every single game. They've had to make comebacks and win it last second. So if they do get in a tight battle down the late in the fourth quarter, those might pay off of shutting down the run and be able to have the mindset to come back and win a football game.
Yeah. And people don't realize that this was the sixth best scoring offense in the country. TCU and Michigan scoring offenses are right neck and neck with each other. So interesting